Hi, welcome to D365 Shot First. This is Charlie Rogers.
Phil Cameen, if you don't know him already,
Somehow. Yes, I seem to be doing an awful lot of talking last month, actually. Interesting, everybody always sort of says, oh, you want to get into the office to do more work, but an awful lot of the time thinking,
I do a lot less.
a lot less work when I'm in an office, whereas, sort of when I'm at home by myself, focus.
I do have to praise Glenn there, actually, because I spoke to him about this before when I was looking at moving away for the first time. I was like, I feel like I will do more work. And he's like, no, I know. He's like, I fully agree that you should do less work when you're in the office, because I want you to have that social aspect and get on with the people you work with. So
Absolutely.
I think it is something that people do acknowledge, or they should acknowledge, that you do less work.
Yeah.
When you're surrounded by
But
others.
you do pick up other, little extra bits when you're in the office that you wouldn't. So when I've been in this office, for example, and I've had, sort of Stu go over to me and go, do you know anything about this? And that might not have been an easier conversation over Teams, where it's very easy just to kind of throw a pencil at me here and go, do you know anything about this?
Very true.
And I'll look for 2 or 3 minutes and I'll go, great, I'll go and get a cup of coffee while I'm thinking about it. I come back and I've got an answer. Whereas, remotely that would have been a much harder thing to do.
You'd have been thinking, oh, are you on red, or are you
on
call?
are you doing? Is he doing any work? Or I was writing an email or something like that. Whereas the interruption in person is a lot less, potentially I think a lot less, because I don't know if you're quite so focused in an office because there's noise and people chatting and, all the social stuff.
Yeah. Anyway, I think, as much so. Well, I don't know actually. I wanted to ask how Michael was. You said he's coming home soon?
He is. He's back home for a reading week and then it's Easter holidays. So that's going to be like 4 weeks. I should be careful about how much I commit to sound here, but he's going to eat us out of house and home. He's a 19-year-old and he's into his, he's going to be 20 another few months actually, and then he's into climbing and stuff. He is away for a week. He's going to Paris to do climbing. He's taking a tent with him as well. I'm thinking a tent in northern France at this time of year is not going to be great, but
Quite a chilly experience.
Quite a chilly experience. Yeah, I'll probably drink enough to, sort of a little bit of meth in the system to keep himself warm enough so he won't freeze. But don't believe it. Yeah, no, it's always nice having him.
Nice.
It's always nice kicking him out too. So.
I was going to say, nice dropping him off.
Yeah. It's lovely seeing you.
Do you always
when
drop
you
him
go?
off, or does he get the train? Or?
He more often than not he gets the train because it's just 2 hours. It's
Not
really
too
quick
bad.
up to Liverpool actually.
Yeah, from Milton Keynes, home of roundabouts.
Yeah, the home of roundabouts. It's great. Love a roundabout. They're not so good when they got oil on them, but they're okay otherwise.
I can't stand.
You can't stand roundabouts. My daughter's learning to drive at the moment, and she's a bit keen to get onto a roundabout, and I'm like, well, look, you have to give way to that car that's over there. And we did have a roundabout incident. This is probably a month ago, actually, where she got onto a roundabout and then slammed on the anchors mid-roundabout. And because I'd gone, there's a car, and I'm reaching for the brake pedals that aren't there, obviously. And she stopped, and then there was a certain amount of breakdown before she could get going again. And I was like going, it's fine, handbrake neutral, it's fine, no one's hit us, let's get the car restarted. And there's a fit.
Because as a man of process and alone, you should really be. My dad actually had why I bring this up, because when I was learning to drive myself, my dad would, when I first started tackling roundabouts.
Yeah.
There was always this roundabout going into home, where there's like a roundabout. There's 4 or 5 junctions coming off this roundabout. So it's quite a tough roundabout. Before we pull into it,
Right.
he'd always pull it, get me to pull over before we got there, and just be like, think about before you get there, where are you going? What lane do you need to be in?
Yeah.
Think about it before you approach the roundabout. 'Cause if you get there and you don't know, and you're in the wrong gear, or you don't know what lane you're meant to be in, it's going to be a tough situation. He's like, so make sure you think of the process before you get there.
Before you get there. Oh, that's good.
Yeah, always helped. I mean, I passed first time, so I guess
So
it must have had something to do with it. But
yeah, I believe it's called IPSCA. So I did which is information, position, speed, acceleration, gear, or something. I get it the wrong way around sometimes. Which is an advanced motoring sort of thing that I learned sometime.
when you did your bike,
I did the bike thing, the enhanced rider scheme. So yeah, I thought Soph would be fantastic at driving, but her nerves tend to get the better of her, whereas Mikey just kind of ploughed on and seemed to do okay with it. So we were going to talk about some other stuff, some more dynamics related stuff, seeing as we are Dynamics 365.
generous, I think, almost saying I guess we are consultants. I was going to say, we're definitely not experts. Well, you may be
Yeah,
actually.
no, I think we have our areas of expertise, whatever that's supposed to be. Isn't that 20,000 hours? Does that make you an expert? I believe.
Well, I'm definitely not quite there.
Not quite there.
No, I'm still probably intermediate. if we're to put it on an hour basis.
On a per hour basis,
Yeah.
20,000 hours.
Yeah.
I don't know how many days or months 20,000 hours is.
10,000 hours, I thought it was. 10,000
Is that
hours, you'd be an
10,000
expert.
And what is 20,000 hours would make you boring? Probably what it is.
Yeah, there you go.
There you go. So I'm definitely into the boring bit. We were going to talk about how Business Central and CE
CRM.
or CRM.
How is it meant to be known now? CRM?
That's a really good question, actually, because it all sits on top of Power Platform, and really, CRM is now Dynamics 365 for sales. I think that's its proper term at the moment. But like all things in Microsoft land,
It'll change in the next
the
6
name
months.
is the name will change. What's that?
The technology will change.
Oh God! Let's do it. It's yeah. Sometimes it feels like it's too much, but yeah, it's constantly on the shift. Yeah, I read lots of stuff this week about people going, okay, if you're not doing all your programming with AI, you're going to get left behind. And I'm thinking, I'm not 100% sure about that, but certainly it's a very important thing.
Can you speed it up? For certain
Yeah, I
aspects?
think this is it. Sort of like most of the time when I come at programming jobs, I kind of have it a kind of written version in my head. Whereas I suppose if I came into programming completely fresh, then I would be reaching out towards an AI.
So do you think it's now
system.
easier to learn programming? No,
Well, my worry is like you learn programming, you learn the ideas and stuff. So you build a model in your mind of how programming works. Whereas if you use AI, then there's an element of shortcut, and that's great. But it's if you're getting that code, are you actually understanding? Are you building a mental model, or are you simply cutting and pasting from Stack Overflow?
You see, when I hurt my foot when I was playing football, it was I'm going to lean this back to Dynamics.
Oh, okay, nice.
But they were like, we're not going to give you a crutch because we'd worry that it wouldn't fully put pressure on.
Because that
Your
helps
foot.
the bone.
Yeah, because that will help it heal and become, more of a mature muscle again.
Right.
And it's the same to what you're saying, right? Where it's the use of AI might be a crutch that would then prevent you from actually putting the pressure on learning what it means and what it does and what it can do. And you might just go, I'll ask Copilot or I'll ask GPT.
Yeah. How reliant you become on that.
Yeah. That's it.
Yeah.
How much of a shortcut does it become to where it becomes your main road almost instead of a shortcut?
Yeah, exactly. It becomes that, half the paths in my town.
See,
I like that.
I keep seeing this on Facebook and things at the moment.
And the footpath goes around the corner like that. Because that's so why didn't they just build it like that in the first place?
So the thing sums up English people, and it's like the road will be all of your saver meter of walking.
Yeah.
You're right, the grass will be fully just dirt where
we just cut across it the whole time. Yeah. They did this near us. They put this big. They're called redways in Milton Keynes, and the path used to be about 1 meter wide, and everyone was like, "Well, that's perfectly okay for a footpath, right?" But they turned it into a redway, and a redway has to be 3 meters wide or something. So they took an entire summer to do half a mile of this redway, and there was dinging and banging and all that kind of stuff. And then towards the end, they got down to where there's a bus stop, and rather than do anything with the bus stop, like move it a couple of feet and have the redway go through, the redway does this weird dogleg around the footpath and then stops or rejoins another redway. And then you've got this weird bit of land where if you're just walking straight on, why would you walk around it? You just walk through the bus stop. And so then there's all this grass, and it was growing quite nicely, and then obviously it's now all just mud because people just walk over it the whole time. Anyway,
Yeah, it's an interesting concept, right? How it might be easier to learn, but then it actually might be a...
Yeah, does it become a crutch? Yeah. What happened? And then the argument, I suppose, is, well, I'm always going to have an AI there. So
why do you need to understand it as well as you did in the past?
In the past, maybe.
To your point, you can hold more knowledge if you don't need to know it all as in depth.
Absolutely. Yeah. Interesting.
True. It's a great way of looking at it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think what we actually wanted to talk about today was related to programming actually, but it was the sync between BC and CE or CRM or however you want to do it.
Yeah, what do you want to do it? Yeah, what do you say? So it starts, I suppose we start at the bottom these days, and for most Microsoft technologies, and certainly in the biz app space, business applications,
Which is all we do.
which is what we do, yeah. Then for Dynamics Business Central and Dynamics 3, I'll call it, I'm going to keep calling it CRM because hopefully people will realize what I'm talking about. But the easiest way to do that, the most straightforward way, is to use Power Automate.
Well, I'd agree and disagree. You know, as someone that's come from Power Platform, you know, I had a few months on Power Platform and then moved over to the BC space. You know, I had an understanding of Power Automate before and how it all works and how it connects things together, you know, especially when I got taught how to use like Canvas apps, and how you can pull that in, you know, pull data in using Power Automate from one table to another or to display something if something else happens. When I went to the BC team, there was, you know, and even when I went to Slovenia and things like that, right, I was going to talks and round tables where we were all talking and the lack of Power Platform knowledge on, you know, for BC consultants, because it hasn't been a requirement for so long.
Yeah.
The lack of knowledge on Power Platform and Power Automate, especially usage, is I think a big, not concern of mine, but like a shock almost, where I was like, wow, is this, you know, obviously because I've come from working with CE, functional consultants and seniors and SAs and, you know, people like yourself, where you guys, it's a second nature to go, oh, you can just do, you know, I'll just build a flow for that, or
Absolutely.
you know, or oh, we'll just write a plugin or something like that. You know, those guys, it's always just, is there a workflow, or is there a workflow we can use, or is it going to just be, we'll give it to the developer to, you know, we'll define it and just give it to the developer and we forget about it almost.
I think there's a bit more push now, isn't there, in the BC space? You know, sort of if you're driving around in BC, on most pages there's a bit where you can actually go to automate and you can start creating flows.
So I can say us especially now, I can't speak for other practices, but us especially now, we're trying to, me and Mark Paxton are especially trying to focus the team on, can we use Power Automate here? Where is Power Automate going to give us an advantage over other practices, and you know, also just using the system to the most it can, you know, the most potential it can be used, you know, utilising everything that's on offer. There are the shortfalls, which is why I, you know, and ahed when you first mentioned it, because
there are, aren't there? Because it's the problem with Power Automate to an extent is how straightforward it is to pick up, and Microsoft obviously sell it as this low code, no code type solution. So you know, somebody who's not necessarily technical can jump in and do this stuff. But there tends to be a lack of rigor, and it's a good word, stick with me, when people start developing things when they are low coders. They're not aware of the idea of design and process and how there's an application life cycle that their code is eventually going to have to go through, because they see things very much in a fairly one-dimensional space. So you know the idea of rigor is that there is work involved behind a job. So you know, when you've been putting up roofs, for example, there is a certain rigor in it. You don't just instantly go and buy tiles. You've got to put up all the struts and all that kind of stuff first. You've got to put the scaffolding up in the same way that when you're developing, you don't just sit down and start coding. And that's the problem with Power Automate, is that it's very easy to just sit down and start doing it without thinking about all the outside edge cases, which are really controlled. So
and the lack of, I mean, it's definitely getting better now as these new release waves, you know, fall upon us. The amount of fields that are exposed. So you know, when we've done things like creating timesheets automatically and then integrating those into BC to, you know, so we can have resource costs and specific costs on us as a resource, basically as field service agents, or however you define a consultant in, you know, in your parameter.
Right.
When you're doing that, we've had to build custom APIs, and I've had to go to the dev and go, oh Simon, can you build me this? Can you build me that? Or can you expose these fields? Or can you know, add these fields into an API that aren't previously there? And like I said, it is getting better, but it's one of those things where if you are less technical, which if you're a BC consultant, I don't expect you to know Power Automate in and out and how variables work and custom connectors and all that kind of stuff. And all this kind of stuff. I don't expect you to know that, because it's not your bag, essentially. Like, it's not your speciality.
Yeah, it doesn't come really as part of the toolkit, you know, historically. And I suppose Microsoft, I remember a point, so I was at Cognizant a few years ago, and there was a push from Microsoft to have developers and consultants as more hybrid skilled in terms of being both BC and CRM specialists. And it's interesting because there's an element of apples and oranges in terms of the way they behave, right? I mean, we talked about this a million times, right? Yeah, I know you don't like the apples and oranges thing, but I don't know what how else to describe that really. You know, a customer in CRM is broadly speaking an account of some kind, and people sometimes call that an organization, and that's great, but it comes out of the box and we have accounts and we have contacts. Whereas in BC land, you know, you've got vendors and customers, and then your customers can be of.
Well, then we've got CRM modules, so then you can have contacts, accounts, and
All this kind
yeah,
of
don't get
stuff.
me wrong, not the best module I've ever used in the world. Would much rather integrate if the option, budget is there
Yeah.
for the client. But obviously, it's not always.
No.
You haven't always got deep pockets. It's just a whole other bunch of licensing, and then you got to pay for the integration and all of that.
Integration, the time to build all this stuff.
Yeah. Error catching, error handling.
Yeah.
The time.
The time. Yeah, well, it's always the time, isn't it? That makes the expense really in these jobs. I think I don't know BC certainly, sort of CRM stroke power platform. Most of the time, I always say that it's kind of 80% of a tool, and the last 20% tends to be something that a consultant and or the community tend to fill in. Actually, I guess for Microsoft to go the whole hog and to give you 100% of the tool would probably mean actually having to build out 120% of the tool. Which would make it, ridiculously expensive.
Well, they're not able to, right? Because they've got to build something that,
it fits everyone,
that fits
right?
is usable for all businesses and all organisations. And if they build that, let's say if you have an aerospace client, they build the modules and speciality for that.
Yeah.
If you then have someone who does food and beverages, it's not going to cover anywhere near the same level of. Well,
other business scenarios, compliance, all that kind of stuff is just not going to be there, is it? So
the documentation and reports, and that differs for every company. And I mean, that's why they've got things like Power BI, and I mean, we use chat reports a lot of the time, but SSOS reports and those kind of things are all there. So you can, like say, the consultant or the community can edit those and tailor those
and fill in the gaps
to what you need. I think that's a very important part of our job. Essentially, is we're not just there to tell you what the system can do. It's that if there's something missing that you do need, we can go and develop it.
We can build it,
or define it to a developer. If you're not, I mean, on the BC side, it's very cut blade. There's not so far we haven't got many hybrid dev consultant, because the system in itself is so fast that it'd be quite a tough job to develop and keep on top of what's always being released. Whereas I know on your side, I guess you have a lot more technical. Or do you? Or am I misunderstanding that maybe?
We have a lot of, I come at it very much from a technical angle, but we've got a lot of functional consultants who will suddenly draw the line and go, no, I can't go any further because that needs to be code or what have you. But we also have an awful lot of people who say they're not technical, and then they're the first ones to sit down and start hacking out bits of Power FX. Again, as a very different, procedurally, a very different kind of programming language. And it's like, okay, they're happy to do these little things, but then in terms of everything else, they're not happy to go and open up Visual Studio. And I suppose it's you bring a certain amount of stuff with you, and whatever Microsoft give you in terms of the missing pieces, you can bring your skill sets hopefully to that and complete those and fill those gaps.
I guess maybe that also depends on experience, right? If you've been consulting for 5-10 years, you might go, what's the harm in giving it a go? And see what happens.
We've got some great devs who, I gave some JavaScript and said, go, we'll need some JavaScript. Do you know any JavaScript? And they were like, I think I've done some before. And I'm like, okay, cool. Have a crack at it this morning. Let's talk at lunchtime and see how you got on. We caught up at lunchtime. I said, let's show me what you got. And he ran it and it worked. And I went, how did you do that? And he went, ChatGPT. And I was like, okay. We had a look at the code. And I was going, okay, this code looks okay. It's broadly speaking, it's correct. I said, I would probably choose to maybe put a few comments in there or something like that. So future self, here are my notes. So when you come back to something nearly always
support it, or
absolutely support it. Sort of make sure that any of the documentation is up to date, so you're aware of it. It's always it's very much dependent upon the person, right?
Yeah, indeed, and also I guess the project, right? Like you say, there you had a bit of leniency probably on time. It wasn't needed instantly. Whereas if you were on a crunch and you're on a deadline, you might have to just go,
I'll do it.
or I'll give it to a dev, or
Yeah, exactly.
Whatever it
Have
may
we
be.
got devs? We've got devs scheduled, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's what's sometimes a downside I think of working in this kind of industry where if you have got a strict deadline, you perhaps haven't got, because I know, even Anwar, we've got employees and, colleagues and friends that, you're like, they want to experience more, also be exposed to it more. But if there's a hard deadline, which
Then-
you usually find with clients there is, that you haven't got the ability to go, you just have a go and see how it goes and see what you can learn from it. And if it's wrong, we can just go back and
and you can make it a learning exercise.
that's
yeah,
it, yeah.
absolutely.
But often we haven't got that ability, which is, sometimes unfortunate. That's just the way the cookie crumbles.
Yeah,
Unfortunately.
absolutely.
But yeah, in relation to BC and CE, if you have got the ability to integrate, nowadays there's obviously the ability now. I mean, we hopped on a call and played around with it a little bit. I know you're doing a talk on it.
Yeah.
And it's the syncing between CE and BC and how that might cut out, well, potentially dev entirely if you've got a very out-the-box system.
Yeah.
And a consultant who's done it a few times could
Switch it on.
Yeah, and just get going.
Yeah, get it going.
Save
Alter
you-
some config and away you go. Yeah, absolutely.
Save you a lot of time. So I just wanted to, it on your side. I know, we know, and if anyone's watching or listening, when you're doing it out the box, it is very much you just map fields to the fields that already exist, and you don't need to do much more than that. And it is very, so you switch it on, you map the fields, and away you go. And you might need to do a few tweaks here and there.
Yeah, there are some, there's some gotchas along the way.
There always
Worrying
are.
about, sort of, okay, have I got a data model in play already? For example, am I using business units on a CRM side? Because suddenly, you've got to map, how do you map company A to business unit Y and all this kind of stuff. Other gotchas, but like you say, in a fresh system, it could be a fairly straightforward job. I'll be honest, historically, I've never ever found somebody who just wants to do vanilla CRM. They always want to customize. And it's interesting, sort of the arguments over the years have been, well, customization is something that should be available to everybody, right? Salesforce, you name it, let's be able to do customization. And then sometimes there's been arguments, and in bigger picture arguments, well, actually, most people's sales, one way or another, is actually the same. And most people, whether or not they like it or don't like the term sales anyway, it might be they're in the not-for-profit space. You go, well, we're not really selling stuff, but the process that you follow is effectively a sales process. And so the argument is there, well, why customize? Save yourself a fortune, use the process that comes out of the box, and keep all of that customization to an absolute minimum. So you're just paying for the software and not having to pay for consultancy. And if I was running an organization like that, I'd be very tempted to go, yeah, that's the route we'll go, because a consultant's time is a big bill, right? So get a system that bends towards you, but if you would just lean into the system, then you could probably have exactly the same, sort of.
I feel like a lot of the time you're right. It isn't the value it provides. It's more often than not, it's what we did before. It's what on the BC side, especially, we hear all the time. They're like, oh, our current system does this, and we're like, yeah, but why?
Yeah, why?
Yeah, is that because the technology of that time was limiting you to that, or the budget at that time was limiting?
Yeah.
So you could only do that? Is there something that we could change or make it more efficient? Or
Did Bill, the guy who put the system together, only know about spreadsheets? And
yeah,
so
that's it.
he created a spreadsheet type system, and you're like, well, look, you don't need to go that way. We could just give you a much more vanilla system. You could save yourself a fortune. Because I think a lot of people, probably think they get a consultant and they are going to try and cream you for every hour, right? And make a lot of money out of you. And certainly, I've always thought that we're going into somebody that I need to get in and out as quick as possible, and give them the best system that I can, and give them, bang for buck and a return on investment, right? So.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to get return business too, right? Like we call it. I know we always say we ethically sell. I don't know if that's even a term you can use, because if you're selling something, it should be something that someone wants or needs.
Yeah.
So why would you have to do it ethically? But like you say, it's in the way that you go and you want to do it in a timely manner.
Yeah.
It's the best way for them to come back, right? Like if you do one phase or two phases, they might come back and go, oh, we've actually got phase 3. We now, it's now gone past April. We've got a new budget. Yeah, we want a phase 3 where it can do this and can do that you mentioned previously. If you've been the kind of consultant who spends weeks doing a day job, they're not.
And we've
they're
all
gonna
met
go,
them, right?
Yeah, they're not going to come back to you and go, oh, we've got this extra piece of work. So they're going to go,
Yeah, you were taking a mickey earlier. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I think it's yeah, like I say, I suppose ethical selling is one word for it, but it's just that as whole about being honest with the client. I would joke that I worked for a CRM company previously, and we were in a meeting and we were doing a demo or something, and the guy went, "Well, Phil, you're technical, aren't you?" You know, and yeah, I went, "Yeah, I've got a technical background." And he was going, "So if I ask you a question, you're going to tell me the truth, aren't you? Because that's what technical people do." And I was like, "Yeah, I am, but there's a reason behind that also, is because we're trying to be honest with you here in terms of what you're trying to do. That's okay. I think it's all right to be honest with them and go, no, it can't do this, or if it does work, you're going to do that. That's going to cost you. This is what it's going to cost." I favour being very straightforward and upfront.
That's what we say. Is there a workaround you can do that is feasible?
Yeah.
Yeah. Or is it worth the 10, 15 grand it's going to cost us to quote, estimate, get a dev to do it, test it, release it to UAT, you guys test it, then we release it to prod. Is it worth that, or is there something you can do that is simply
okay, it's going to be 3 extra clicks for you. Is that what's 3 clicks worth?
Over a year, is that going to cost you 15 grand, or is it not?
Is it not? Yeah, exactly.
That's it. And it often comes down to how often do you have to do said thing. Let's say if it's 5 clicks and you do it 5 times a day, you might go, might be worth, save me 25 clicks a day.
Yeah.
Over a year or two, it might be worth just paying for it to make it
absolutely. If it also reduces errors, 3 clicks generally is probably not going to get you an error, but 25 clicks over several forms or pages or whatever BC potentially
something
likely to screw up, right? So absolutely.
That's it. So you're relating it back to syncing CE and BC, or BC and CRM, however you want to coin it.
Yeah.
What say you haven't got an out of the box system? What would then be the
Well, then
process?
if you just wanted your data visible in CE, then you could go virtual tables. So that's a nice way of it's a nice trick. I think we mentioned it before, where you can see data from any other system and deal with it as a dataverse table. So you can say, I want to create record X, and what actually is happening under the hood is it's going out and it's calling this other system. Also a great way of saving money. If you've got 40 gigabytes in a SQL server in Azure, it's only going to cost you about £4 in a month. Dataverse, it's about 1,500 quid. So these things you need to be aware of in terms of how much money has the client got, how much do they want to spend, how much dev work do we need to do in order to save them that, all this kind of stuff.
Well, it's true, because you might say, let's say £1,000 on the virtual table, but is it going to cost 3 or 4 days of billable hours building it?
Yeah, you shouldn't do for that kind of stuff, but absolutely, these things we need to take into account.
That's it. And I know, obviously, with when you're adding things, it's not just the virtual tables on the CRM side. Like, say you've got a BC system that you're integrating into CE. If we've got custom fields that we've built using AL, we've had to extend the tables there. When I bring that over to CE, like you say, you're not just paying for the virtual table then. You're going to have to pay for it if you're going from CE to BC. You're then going to have to pay for your virtual table and for that to be extended in AL. So you're going to have to pay for the developer's time on the Business Central side too.
Yeah.
So it's not as easy as just going, as long as it's in CE, I can just add it into BC. It's not. You're having to extend both tables, and I think sometimes it might be easier to not sync in a way, because you're just calling APIs essentially.
Yeah.
Which in some ways might be easier just to get someone who's pro code.
Sit down and actually, build a custom connector or some kind of function app which actually does all the mapping, because that's kind of bread and butter for most developers in the C# world. Is if they're doing any level of integration, they will have all written some kind of mapper or used auto mapper or something like that in the C# world, and that's very straightforward to put together relatively.
But where's that come? Obviously, I'm not a dev, and I speak from a more technical background in like supply chain management side of BC, but I don't touch development because I'd hurt the system in a way it's not been hurt before. But when you say everyone's done that, and what kind of ability does it require, do you think, to do
someone who's anybody who's written some form of web API? So someone who's got, I would just my line of work, it tends to be C#, but Java developer or somebody along those lines, who's able to sit down some kind of web API, and once that web API is available, then that's very straightforward to become a custom connector inside of Power Platform. And once you've got a custom connector, then if you want to, that's fairly straightforward to wire up through Power Automate. But it just means that all the complexity is held in a piece of code that's hopefully taken care of by that developer, and then on the outer edge of it is visible to the rest of the system, and hopefully visible to functional consultants. So if things do go wrong, that when errors occur, they're able to go, okay, the problem's happened over there, and more often than not, it'll be a fairly straightforward thing to go in and fix that piece of code and then release it through any level of kind of ALM that hopefully you've got in place.
I was going to say, because I've got a few questions around that actually, where I've seen recently, I've read on LinkedIn, I've read a couple of blog posts, I've seen a couple of YouTube videos around, which, by the way, I think we all find ourselves watching quite often. You'll see things, you go, oh, how is it? Doesn't relate to me at all. But
You dive in, absolutely.
Yeah, like I've seen how Power Pages at the moment is exploding into the space really. It's becoming a lot more usable than it was before. It's a lot more affordable, I think, than it was before.
The licensing is still interesting in that area. There was a point in time where it was very, very, very cheap. You could just pay for the website, if you like, and now you pay depending on how many people are hitting it, and it's whether or not they're anonymous users or whether or not they're users who are signing in. So Microsoft for years have been saying that the user and the password, you can still keep those inside of CRM Power Platform, but they've been saying for years, well, really, you should be using some kind of third-party provider, and that pushes you out onto Azure and B2C. So, but that's it's an interesting area for sure. And
sorry to cut you off. Where I was going with that was is there a benefit or a con maybe even between using the sync? Is the data in Dataverse accessible Power Pages, to Power Pages easier, or is a custom connector almost more beneficial for that?
Well, for Power Pages, you could almost, depending on the type of view of that data that you want, you could almost say a virtual table is maybe the win there. If all you want to do is expose data from Business Central to the outside world, because I think you're covered at that point by the licensing. But of course, once you start wanting to write to that data, then you could write down into your Power Page, could be talking to the virtual table, and then in turn talking to Business Central. But so it's an area I think I'd have to definitely want to go and have a chat with a few BC guys as to what are you doing multiplexing there, which is the idea of using the licensing and using products which are redirecting effectively the user to avoid paying for the license for the original system. But it's an interesting area.
That's where licensing becomes quite
a little bit
technical subject in itself.
Yeah, it does become a bit scary.
You don't want to be skirting
No, absolutely.
the rules or the agreement you're signing up to effectively.
Yeah.
I think the good thing about using Power Automate is like you say, it's very easy to support.
Mm.
That's my only risk and worry sometimes when we talk about custom connectors may be more beneficial is that they might be for the right ability dev. But we're very lucky where we've got dev teams and functional teams, and then we've got BC practice who again we've got a dev team and functional teams and specialists. Where if you're on a smaller practice or if you're a contractor or something along those lines,
well, this is it. You've been a consultant. You've given them a system. You've moved away, and you're on to the next project. Is there an argument? Nothing is as certain as the fact that things are going to change, right? So if you do need to change stuff, how dynamic and how configurable is this custom connector that you built, for example?
Well, I guess it's always, you've got to always, when you're, especially you're more of an SA role than I definitely am. Mm. Whereas it's like, I guess when you design a system or design a solution for their problem effectively is what your job is, right?
Yeah.
When you're doing that, I guess you've always got to contemplate who's going to be picking it up and who's going to support it. Yeah. What kind of ability have they got, or what kind of access have they got to knowledge that they need? Is that something you always take into consideration?
Oh, absolutely. Thinking, okay, is this an organisation that's going to take on, we're going to do some BAU? Are we going to be able to pick up this work with them? Is this something they're going to try and take on themselves? Is this some system where we're training them up in order to develop some in-house skill for them? So all those kind of questions do need to be asked up front.
It's interesting almost because I was relating that back to your wife's job almost. Like I guess social work's, like you say, the same thing, right? Where they're looking after a person, whereas we're trying to look after a system. So it's in a weird way, you're aiming to do the same thing. Yeah,
absolutely. You want to be able to help them to the best of your ability, and then you want them to be able to give them the tools to manage the situation themselves.
Yeah, so I was wondering if maybe being with your partner's helped you
There you
have
go.
more of an understanding.
Better developer in that way.
Who would have thought?
Who'd have thought?
Maybe get a job.
Absolutely.
See how well she does.
Driving.
No, it's good. Anyway, I think that pretty much
Yeah.
wraps up effectively what we're talking about without going too deep and which you can't do without being able to.
Yeah, without being able to demo and stuff
Yeah.
like that. Absolutely.
Which, if they wanted to watch, I understand you're doing a talk.
I am. We're
Soon.
talking. I've done a couple of talks already in this space with a colleague of mine, a friend of mine, Andy Wingate. We talk about we call it the 4 pillars. So we have Power Automate, virtual tables, the sync, and custom code. There are probably other ways to do it as well, but we do kind of caveat around it so that we can keep the talk on focus. So, yeah.
Good.
You see it being done, come along and have a listen.
Sounds good. Thank you very much.
All right, take care, man. I'll speak to you soon.